Hello everyone, my name is Emily Hobbs. I'm 25 years old from Cincinnati, Ohio. I graduated from the University of Cincinnati, and I soon will be graduating from East Carolina University's master's program. Now, before we begin, I'm going to give a brief explanation on 3 different types of book talk styles. The first-person book talk is when the speaker takes on the persona of the character in the book and talks about the plot as if they're living it. An excerpt book talk is when the speaker reads a book to the audience. This way, the audience can make the choice for themselves whether they want to read the book after hearing a part of it. Finally, a description book talk. This is when the speaker gives their best summary of what happens in the book. Now, the most important part is to not spoil the ending. This way, if a member of the audience chooses to read the book, they can find out the ending for themselves. Now today, I'm presenting to you Not Your Teacher's Pride and Prejudice, a book talk series on injustice through emotion. There are many types of discrimination out there: age, gender, race, religion, and many more. A lot of the time, this discrimination is fueled by human emotions, and the books I'm going to talk about today examine that topic of injustice through emotion. Some of these books are modern-day examples, while others are historical. This allows readers to understand that emotional discrimination is out there and has been out there for a while. All of these stories I'm sharing with you today are fictional, but some of them are based on actual events and actual people. It's important for us moving forward to be aware that these types of injustices need to be understood to prevent us from acting upon our own emotions in the same way and just causing this cycle to happen. Now, shall we get started? Today I'm going to read you an excerpt to start things off from the New York Times bestseller called The Inheritance Games, written by Jennifer Lynn Barnes. The book provides a unique view of how a person can be judged strictly from her background. Our protagonist is a nearly homeless high school girl named Avery Kylie Grams. She has been thrust into the insane world of the Hawthorne family. So I'm going to read to you today from chapter 9. Nothing about this day felt real, and tomorrow I'd go back to Connecticut, a little bit richer hopefully, and with a story to tell. I'd probably never see the Hawthornes again. I'd never see a view like this again. By the time I returned to the great room, Jamison Hawthorne had miraculously managed to find a shirt and a suit jacket. He smiled in my direction and gave me a little salute. Beside him, Grayson stiffened, his jaw muscles tensing. "Now that everyone is here," one of the lawyers said, "let's get started." The 3 lawyers stood in triangle formation. The one who'd spoke shared Elise's dark brown hair, brown skin, and self-assured expression. I assumed he was the Ortega in McNamara, Ortega, and Jones. The other 2, presumably Jones and McNamara, stood to either side. Since when does it take 4 lawyers to read a will, I thought. "You are here," Mr. Ortega said, projecting his voice to the corners of the room, "to hear the last will and testament of Tobias Tattersall Hawthorne. Per Mr. Hawthorne's instructions, my colleagues will now distribute the letters he has left for each of you." The other men began to make the rounds of the room, handing out envelopes one by one. "You may open these letters when the reading is concluded." I was handed an envelope. My full name was written in calligraphy on the front. Beside me, Libby looked up at the lawyer, but he passed over her and went on delivering envelopes to other occupants of the room. "Mr. Hawthorne stipulated that all the following individuals must be physically present for the reading of this will: Skye Hawthorne, Zara Hawthorne Caligaris, Nash Hawthorne, Grayson Hawthorne, Jamison Hawthorne, Alexander Hawthorne, and Miss Avery Kylie Grams of Newcastle, Connecticut. I felt as inconspicuous as I would have if I'd looked down and discovered I wasn't wearing clothes. Since all of you are here, Mr. Ortega continued, we may begin. Beside me, Livy slipped her hand into mine. I, Tobias Tattersall Hawthorne, Mr. Ortega read, being of sound body and mind, decree that my worldly possessions, including all monetary and physical assets, be disposed of as follows. To Andrew and Lottie Laughlin, for years of loyal service, I bequeath a sum of $100,000 apiece, with lifelong rent-free tenancy granted in Wayback Cottage, located on the western border of my Texas estate. The older couple I'd seen earlier leaned into each other. All I could think was, $100,000? The Laughlin's presence wasn't even mandatory for the reading of this will. And they'd just been given $100,000 apiece? I tried very hard to remember how to breathe. To John Orrin, head of my security detail, who saved my life more times and in more ways than I can count. I leave the contents of my toolbox, held currently in the offices of McNamara, Ortega, and Jones, as well as a sum of $300,000. Tobias Hawthorne knew these people, I told myself, heart thumping. They worked for him. They mattered to him. I'm nothing. To my mother-in-law, Pearl O'Day, I leave an annuity of $100,000 a year, plus a trust for medical expenses set forth in the appendix. All jewelry belonging to my late wife, Alice O'Day Hawthorne, shall pass to her mother upon my death, to be distributed as she sees fit upon hers. Nan harumphed. Don't you be getting any ideas, she ordered the room at large. I'm going to outlive you all. Mr. Ortega smiled, but then his smile faltered. He paused and tried again. To my daughters, Zara Hawthorne Caligaris and Sky Hawthorne, I leave funds necessary to pay off all debts accrued as the date and time of my death. Mr. Ortega paused again, his lips pushing themselves together. The other two lawyers stared straight ahead, avoiding looking at any member of the Hawthorne family directly. Additionally, I leave to Sky my compass. May she always know true north. And Zara, I leave my wedding ring. May she love as wholly and steadfastly as I loved her mother. Another pause, more painful than the last one. Go on, that came from Zara's husband. To each of my daughters, Mr. Ortega read slowly. Beyond that, already stated, I leave a one-time inheritance of $50,000. $50,000? I no sooner thought those words than Zara's husband echoed them out loud, irate. Tobias Hawthorne left his daughters less than he left his security detail? Suddenly, Sky's reference to Grayson as the heir apparent took on a whole new meaning. You did this, Zara turned to Sky. She didn't raise her voice, but it was deadly all the same. Me? Sky said, indignant. Daddy was never the same after Toby died, Zara continued. Disappeared, Sky corrected. God, listen to you! Zara lost a hold on her tone. You got in his head, didn't you, Sky? Batted your eyelashes, convinced him to bypass us and leave everything to your... sons. Sky's voice was crisp. The word you are looking for is sons. The word she's looking for is bastards. Nash Hawthorne had the thickest accent of anyone in the room. Not like we haven't heard it before. If I had had a son, Zara's voice caught. But you didn't. Sky let that sink in. Did you, Zara? Enough! Zara's husband stepped in. We will sort this out. I'm afraid there is nothing to be sorted. Mr. Ortega re-entered the fray. You will find that this will is ironclad, with significant disincentives to anyone who might be tempted to challenge it. I translated that to roughly mean, shut up and sit down. Now if I may continue, Mr. Ortega looked back down at the will in his hands. To my grandsons, Nast Westbrook Hawthorne, Grayson Davenport Hawthorne, Jameson Winchester Hawthorne, and Alexander Blackwood Hawthorne, I leave everything, Zara muttered bitterly. Mr. Ortega spoke over her. $250,000 apiece, payable on their 25th birthdays until such time to be managed by Elisa Ortega, trustee. What? Elisa sounded shocked. I mean, what? The hell, Nash told her pleasantly. The phrase you are looking for, darling, is what the hell. Tobias hadn't left everything to his grandsons. Given the scope of his fortune, he'd left them a pittance. What is going on here? Grayson asked, each word deadly and precise. Tobias Hawthorne didn't leave everything to his grandsons. He didn't leave everything to his daughters. My brain is going to halt right here. My ears rang. Please, everyone, Mr. Ortega held up his hand. Allow me to finish. $46.2 billion, I thought. My heart attacking my rib cage and my mouth sandpaper dry. Tobias Hawthorne was worth $46.2 billion. He left his grandsons $1 million combined, $100,000 total to his daughters, another $500,000 to his servants, an annuity for Nan. The math equation did not add up. It couldn't add up. One by one, the other occupants of the room turned to stare at me. The remainder of my estate, Mr. Ortega said, including all properties, monetary assets, and worldly possessions not otherwise specified, I leave to Avery Kylie Gramps. Could you imagine being given a fortune from a person you don't even know? Would you be able to handle the pressure from the press and the jilted family? Let the games begin. Okay, on to the next book. Does everyone here know the definition of the word displacement? It's an act of being forcibly moved from one place to another. My next selection is a historical graphic novel titled Displacement, written and illustrated by Kiku Hughes. Our main character, Kiku, is a third-generation Japanese American. She knows little of her grandparents, their history, or their culture, nor does she really care. During a trip to San Francisco to find her mother's childhood home, a rather bored Kiku is enclosed in fog and finds herself in the middle of 1940s San Francisco, en route to a Japanese internment camp. Without her phone or her mom, Kiku is completely alone as she enters a horse track converted into living quarters for thousands of Japanese. Talk about a shock to the system. I don't know about you, but I don't think I would have been able to handle things as well as Kiku did. Instead of freaking out, Kiku pulls herself together and begins a life trapped in a camp. Along the way, she meets people, she makes friends, she even finds herself living right next door to her grandmother and great-grandparents. Questions Kiku had but never found the courage to ask were slowly being answered as she lived day by day in the camp. Displacement is both a work of fiction and fact. Many parts of the story are true events that happened during World War II. The author completed a lot of research to make this novel as accurate as possible, but there's still aspects that had to be created so the whole story could work. I recommend this book to everybody, especially those who enjoy a good graphic novel. It's an easy read, only takes a couple hours to finish, but the story, it will leave a lasting impact. It gives a new understanding to this part of history that I wasn't exactly familiar with. There are many different acts of discrimination by different countries occurring during World War II. As author Kiku Hughes writes at the end of her novel, these stories are vital, but only if you use them to take action. It's important to understand and remember history to preventing it from repeating itself. Speaking of history, do I have any history buffs out there? Any readers looking for a different perspective of World War II? Traitor by Amanda Macrina is another one to add to your collection. Traitor follows the story of two different young men during two different periods of time in World War II. Alexi's story happens during the summer of 1941, and Tolya's story happens during summer of 1944. It's not your typical Allies versus Axis plot from the war, and it's not your typical recount of the concentration camps as you might expect. This story follows the violence between the people of Poland and the people of the Ukraine caused by occupation of Germany and the Soviet Union. Alexei and Tolya are both labeled as traitors during their time of the war, but they're labeled for different reasons. They must fight tooth and nail every minute of the day to stay alive. Stay alive in a world where bullets are constantly flying, food is an anomaly, and they're hated by both sides. But in a battle where it's nearly impossible to tell friend from foe, is there even a meaning to the word traitor? When the only thing on your mind is not dying, regardless of what you have to do or who you have to lie to. Here's an excerpt from Tolya's story. He adjusted the knobs of the scope. The gun crew and the hayricks had seen the spotter fall. Through the scope, Tolya watched them wheel the machine gun around to face the hillside. He could see the pale, moonlit blur of the gunner's face above the barrel of the gun. He pressed his cheek to the stock and squeezed his eyes shut, curling his finger over the trigger. The mouth of a pistol pushed cold and hard against the base of his skull. He froze. Traitor is a work of fiction based on real people and real occurrences during World War II. The story is dark. It's filled with what you would expect from a war novel. War, tragedy, death, violence. But with the dark comes the light of deep loyalty to one's family, friends, and religion. Macrina does a magnificent job showing readers an unfamiliar side to an infamous part of history. My next book selection moves us back to modern times with Today, Tonight, Tomorrow, written by Rachel Lynn Solomon. Today marks the day that Rowan Roth will officially beat Neil McNair in their 4-year-long bitter battle of being the best student of Westview High. Say that 4 times fast. From essay contests to test scores to becoming student council president, everything was a competition, and today is the day Rowan Roth will win it all and be announced valedictorian of her senior class. At least, that was the plan. Rowan's last day turns into the opposite of what she'd been dreaming of since she was 14. An absolute McNightmare. It's all his fault. Neil McNair did what he does best, get in Rowan's way. Tonight, bitter rivals turn into unforeseen allies. Neil is named valedictorian, leaving Rowan only one more opportunity to best the boy that she hates, Howl, a game played by the seniors every year that takes them all over Seattle. After learning they've been chosen as main targets of the game by their fellow classmates, Rowan and Neil team up and agree to leave the destroying of each other until they're the last two standing. Tonight opens up a whole new world as bitter rivals begin to open up to each other for the first time. It turns out Rowan and Neil knew nothing of each other outside of school. Amidst the battle to stay alive in the game, romanticist Rowan begins to realize something she never thought was possible. Neil McNair might actually be that special someone she's been looking for all this time. Tomorrow, Rowan comes to understand the love that she has craved so desperately might have been standing next to her this entire time. I found it really interesting that this book just takes place in one single day. You might be wondering, doesn't it get boring if it's just one day? No, not boring at all. The combination of adventure and budding romance is excellent. Neither one overpowers the other. The battle of wits between Rowan and Neil is funny, and the thrill of the game howl keeps the pages turning. I suggest you read today, tonight, tomorrow to find out who wins the game howl and what becomes of our rivals, Rowan and Neil. My next selection covers a deep-rooted topic in the throes of human emotion. Long Way Down is a graphic novel written by Jason Reynolds and graphics by Danica Novgorodoff. There are 3 rules for the broken to follow. Number 1, do not cry. Will's brother Sean has been shot in the middle of the basketball court, but Will cannot cry. He cannot cry because that is what the rules say. The rules that have been passed down from uncle to brother to son to friend. Everybody knows the rules. Everybody knows you cannot cry even though your loved one has been shot. Rule number 2, do not snitch. Will knows who killed his brother, at least he's fairly sure he knows. But it's against the rules to snitch to the cops. Just tell them you don't know anything. Tell them you didn't see anything. Will is not the only one who knows who killed Sean, but nobody's going to break the rules. Rule number 3, revenge. It's Will's turn. Just like his fellow people before him, it's Will's turn to take revenge for his brother. If someone you love gets killed, find the person who killed them and kill them. That's the basis of rule number 3, followed by everybody. Will finds his brother's gun and heads for the elevator to complete his revenge. The elevator ride that should have taken Will down 7 levels to the main lobby of his apartment building in a matter of seconds turned into a seemingly never-ending string of meeting people who are dead. Wait, Buck was shot and killed, and Danny was shot and killed when her and Will were just 8. As the elevator stops on each floor, a new person steps on, each one a connection to the past, no longer alive. Each one shot dead for the same reason, an act of revenge. The people of the past tell Will a story of the endless cycle of revenge and violence that led to each one of them dying. The question is, how will Will respond? I read the graphic novel version of this book that has won many awards, including the Newbery Honor, the Coretta Scott King Honor, and the Prince Honor, just to name a few. The graphics created by Danica Novgorodoff are absolutely astonishing. It's hard for me to even describe the impact I felt while reading this book. Author Jason Reynolds has done an amazing job writing a novel that takes place in a matter of 60 seconds. The final book I'm going to talk about today is titled Scythe by Neal Shusterman. Can you imagine living in a world where there's no pain, no violence, no hatred, no illness? Natural death doesn't exist. Sounds like a dream come true, right? You can look the way you want, be the age you want forever. It seems like the definition of perfection. But in a world where you can't die, there comes a point where somebody has got to die. Enter the Scythedom, an elite society tasked with the unthinkable, population control. It's not considered killing, and it's not considered murder. They refer to it as gleaning. When protagonists Citra and Rowan have separate strange encounters with the same scythe, they have no idea their worlds are about to collide and turn upside down. Both have been chosen as apprentices to learn the art of killcraft, and neither want the honor of being chosen as the next scythe. The following is an excerpt from the journal of one of the scythes. It is the most important thing a person can be asked to do, and knowing that it is for the greater good doesn't make it any easier. People used to die naturally. Old age used to be a terminal affliction, not a temporary state. There were invisible killers called diseases that broke the body down. Aging couldn't be reversed. There were accidents from which there was no return. Planes fell from the sky. Cars actually crashed. There was pain, misery, despair. It's hard for most of us to imagine a world so unsafe, with dangers lurking in every unseen, unplanned corner. All of that's behind us now. and yet the simple truth still remains. People have to die. One would think that apprenticing under a scythe and learning the art of professional killing would be as crazy as it gets. But for Rowan and Citra, it's only the beginning. Scythe is actually a 5-part novel of 400 pages. It's a Printz Award winner for excellence in young adult literature. The book revolves around a main theme of death, and it's dark most of the plot. But there's this intense thrill aspect that keeps you turning the pages. The philosophical debate between life and death is really mind-blowing, and it just causes this roller coaster of emotions. Is the act of gleaning right? Or is it wrong no matter how you look at it? What happens to Citra and Rowan? Do they both become scythes against their better judgment? Would you be able to live a life where the first commandment is thou shalt kill? There's no such thing as living in a perfect world. I want to thank everyone for joining me today and Not Your Teacher's Pride and Prejudice. Hopefully, one of the books I spoke about today has piqued your interest and will leave you with a better understanding of injustice through human emotion. Thank you.